Today we are going to be talking about comparing fractions using benchmark fractions. So benchmark fractions are basically fractions that you can use to kind of gauge how big other fractions are. The fraction that I think is probably most important, and really the only fraction that I would consistently use doing benchmark fractions, just because it's the easiest, is 1/2. Basically, if we're looking at two numbers, or two fractions, and one of them is lower than 1/2, and one of them is higher than 1/2, then obviously the one that's higher than 1/2 is greater than the one that's lower than 1/2, right? So that's what you would do. That's how you would use a benchmark fraction. Now, the question is, how do we figure out if a fraction is lower or less than 1/2, or if it's greater than 1/2? And that is pretty easy. So what you want to do basically is you take the denominator, right? So let's say we have 3/8, just like we do over here. So just like we do here, right? So we have 3/8. Now all I have to do to figure out what a half is in eighths is divide 8 by 2, which equals 8 divided by 2 equals 4, and then put that as the numerator. So 4/8 is equal to 1/2. Any time that the numerator times 2 gives you the denominator, right? So 4 times 2 equals 8. It's equal to 1/2. So for 7/12ths, okay, for 12ths, we just have to divide 12 divided by 2, and that's going to give us 6. Okay, so that means 6/12ths is 1/2. So 3/8 is less than 4/8, okay? And 7/12ths is bigger than 6/12ths. So that means 7/12ths is bigger than 1/2 and 3/8 is smaller than 1/2. So obviously 7/12ths is greater than 3/8. Now, let's look at this second one, 6/8 and 5/12. Well, I know that 4/8 is equal to 1/2, so 6/8 is more than 4/8, and in 12ths, 5 is greater than, or 5 is less than 6, right? So 1/2 in 12ths is 6/12ths. So since 6/8 is greater than 1/2 and 5/12ths is lower than 1/2, 6/8 is greater than 5/12ths. Now, on this third one, this one's going to get a little tricky, and I'll show you why. 5/6, obviously 3/6, right, is half. 6 divided by 2 equals 3. So we just put that as the numerator. So 3/6 is half, so 5/6 is more than 1/2. Now we have 3/9, okay? So 9 divided by 2. It doesn't actually divide evenly, right? It's not an even number. So technically the answer is 4.5. But you can also just think about it as, well, I know that you can kind of go 1 down from 8, or from 9, which is 8, and you can go 1 up, and then it would be 4/8 and 5/10 or a half, right? So if we have 4/9, that's going to be less, just under a half, and if we have 5/9, that's going to be just over a half. So you can actually just look at the number right below it and the number above it, the denominator if it's odd, in this case 8 and 10, and then look at what half is of those ones, and then 4/9 is going to be just under half, and 5/9 is going to be just over a half. Okay, so 3/9 is obviously under a half, 5/6 is over a half, and so 5/6 is greater than 3/9. And also, remember, we can always find common denominators, right? If we were adding these fractions, we would have to find a common denominator anyway. So if you find a common denominator, you can always figure out which one's bigger, because if there's a common denominator, whichever numerator is greater, that's going to be the bigger fraction, because it's more pieces that are more even pieces, right? So in this case, 8 and 12 for this top one here. So 3/8 and 8/12, or 12. I know that 24 is a common denominator, so I can just do 2 times 2, and then 7 times 2. That's 14 24ths, and then 8 times 3 equals 24, so then 3 times 3 is 9, and then 3 times 8 is 24. So obviously 14 24ths is bigger than 9 24ths. You can always multiply just by the denominator here, and then it'll give you the opposite fraction by the denominator of the other fraction, right? So in this case we're going to do 3/8 times 12 over 12, and then 7/12 times 8 over 8, and 3 times 12 is 36, 8 times 12 is 96, and then 7 times 8 is 56, 12 times 8 obviously is 96, so 56 96 is obviously greater than 36 96. So you can always do that. Always find a common denominator. You can find the least common denominator, or you can just use the trick where you just multiply by the by the denominator, the opposite fraction's denominator. And as long as you do the math right, you will always get the right answer.